The Galactic Concord was a council of the wise, the ancient, and by their own declaration, the technologically superior. For over 600 cycles, they had guided newer civilizations into the cosmic fold, setting the standards for diplomacy, warfare, and science. When a new species emerged from the shadows of their star system, the Concord prepared once again to usher primitives into the light. That species was humanity. Initial probes sent to Sol reported curious anomalies. Earth's orbit was cluttered, with satellites that barely functioned, some rotating erratically. Others held in place with what the AI observers claimed was reflective adhesive strip material. Their ships were crude, loud, and devoid of the elegance found in Concord fleets. One drone caught footage of Terran technicians slapping a length of silver tape onto a vessel's cracked hull, nodding approvingly. The council was amused. In a formal session, the Zereth ambassador presented an image of a Terran shuttle with what looked like rust and scorch marks around its thrusters. The assembly laughed. The Hydrax Lord General declared that humanity must have built their starcraft in a scrapyard. Even the usually stoic Grolic engineers couldn't suppress their chuckles at Earth's primitive jury-rig designs. After all, Concord ships were constructed using molecular fusing. High precision guided their repairs. Their power cells were quantum stabilized. Their battle cruisers floated like phantoms, sleek and silent. Compared to that, Terran tech looked like something welded together by mad mechanics using household tools and a caffeine overdose. So the Concord prepared a formal invitation for humanity to observe, to study, and maybe one day to join. But before any diplomat could be dispatched, the humans arrived. A lone Terran warship dropped out of warp near Grell Station, the Concord's newest forward hub. It was designated the UTS Righteous Misfire name that raised more than a few eyebrows. Its hull was scratched, its paint was uneven. One of its lateral thrusters coughed fire intermittently like it had a cold. It looked like it should have fallen apart mid-jump. The Concord hailed the vessel with a calm, polite message. "Welcome to Concord Space. State your purpose." The reply came in a Terran accent laced with static and sarcasm. "To sightseeing. Don't worry, we brought snacks, spare parts, and enough duct tape to fix your dignity." Static crackled, but the message was clear enough to ignite a full-blown diplomatic scandal. The Concord's top analysts scrambled to assess the threat. Level. Reports from fringe sectors had noted increasing Terran expansion, colonies appearing on barely habitable rocks, mining operations that violated every environmental guideline. And yet somehow, they kept surviving and thriving. The Council hesitated. Surely, one ship was no real threat. They ordered Grell Station to observe and de-escalate. But observation didn't last long. The Righteous Misfire opened fire first, not with standard plasma, but with what appeared to be modified kinetic torpedoes. Heavy, slow-moving, but devastating when they struck. Grell Station shields weren't calibrated for such primitive, brute force attacks. First torpedo punched through Hangar Bay 7 like a sledgehammer through paper. Panic spread. Concord Marines mobilized, expecting a chaotic boarding party. They got something worse. Terran Marines deployed via ballistic drop, pods essentially steel coffins, launched like bullets into the station's structure. One crashed through a supply corridor. The hatch blowing open to reveal a woman in battered armor, visor cracked and repaired with what else duct tape. She raised her rifle and spoke calmly. "Captain Maya Voss, you mocked our tech. Now you get to test it." Her team poured out behind her. An odd mix of firepower and improvised gear, exosuits with visible soldering work, drones buzzing overhead, marked with spray-painted numbers, and rifles clearly hand-modified beyond spec. Some Concord troops thought the humans looked like a parody of real soldiers. They weren't laughing long. The Terrans fought with brutal efficiency, turning every corridor into a trap, every control panel into a hacking node. They didn't follow Concord tactics, they made their own. One engineer stopped mid-firefight to tape a broken coolant pipe shut and keep the system from freezing. Another bypassed an airlock lockdown by hot wiring it with a metal spoon and a portable charger. The Concord's polished, protocol-bound forces weren't ready. In less than an hour, Grell Station's western quadrant was under Terran control. galaxy had underestimated humanity. Because where others relied on perfection, the humans relied on adaptation. And sometimes, it's a little duck. The fall of Grell Station's western quadrant sent shockwaves through the galactic concord. A single Terran ship battered, loud and by all accounts laughably primitive, had breached one of their fortified installations and held ground against trained Concord security forces. But what alarmed military analysts the most wasn't the weapons the humans carried. It was the way they used them and how they repaired them. Captain Maya Voss, a legend among Terran Black Ops units, was not interested in diplomacy. She had arrived with a mission, and the chaos her team unleashed was not random. It was intentional doctrine. What Terran war manuals referred to as field engineering in adverse conditions, though her crew lovingly called it the duct tape doctrine. As Concord reinforcements scrambled to seal off remaining sections of Grell Station, human Marines dug in. Not in conventional military fashion with barricades and fixed lines. Instead, they built makeshift cover out of scrap metal. They rerouted door controls using disconnected wires and bits of chewing gum. And everywhere there was duct tape. To the Concord, it looked absurd. To the humans, it was standard operating procedure. When a Concord plasma burst collapsed a corridor wall and trapped 2 Terran soldiers behind rubble, the response wasn't panic. A nearby engineer, barely out of his 20s, opened his rucksack, pulled out a collapsible saw, and began cutting through the twisted metal with practiced ease. He sealed his own damaged oxygen line with duct tape mid-operation, and once his comrades were free, he patched the wall with flexible plating and sprayed insulation foam over the breach. The Grolek observers monitoring the feeds were stunned. Are they repairing structural integrity during combat? They're constructing fallback positions from debris and using adhesive fabric as primary reinforcement. The Hydrax general, overseeing station defense, General Anksil, was furious. This is an insult to warfare. They're not soldiers, they're junkyard raiders. And yet, the kill-to-loss ratio favored the Terrans. Despite their apparent lack of elegance, they moved with confidence. Their suits weren't sleek, but they worked patched with layers of thermal tape and even bits of scrap armor bolted in on the field. One Marine had 3 knives duct taped to his thigh plate. Another's helmet bore the words "You wish this was standard issue" painted across a scorch mark. Concord troopers fought bravely, but they were rigid, trained to rely on systems. On automation, on precision. When those systems failed, they hesitated. Terrans, however, expected failure. It thrived in it. They adapted mid-battle, not with hesitation, but with gleeful determination. In one hallway ambush, a Concord detachment used drone support to flank a Terran squad. The human drones were outmatched older models, slower processors, inferior maneuvering. But one Terran technician cracked open a casing mid-firefight, swapped in a spare capacitor stolen from a vending machine, and duct-taped the drone's wing back into place. It flew again, shooting erratically but enough to distract the Concord. Troops forward just long enough. Human grenades weren't standard shapes. They were cobbled together from explosive compounds. Timing fuses and steel nuts for shrapnel. Their hacking tools were customized decks with cracked screens, some visibly held together with elastic bands. Concord forces kept trying to classify the equipment. They failed every time. How do you classify improvisation? General Ensel ordered. One final push send in the elite Corindar strike unit, cybernetically enhanced Concord enforcers. They moved as one, each equipped with armor systems linked by neural net. They were fast, precise, and fearless. But humans weren't fighting with precision. They were fighting with personality. Captain Voss intercepted the Corindars head-on. Her exosuit was scorched, with panels removed for mobility and power cables rerouted externally. One Concord soldier laughed when he saw her helmet had no faceplate, just polarized goggles and a rebreather. She answered with a rail spike to the gut. Her team outmaneuvered the Corindars with unexpected tactics. One Marine used a maintenance drone as a hoverboard to slide under incoming fire. Another threw a canister labeled expired coffee dew, not drink into the enemy formation. It exploded in a cloud of sticky vapor and microwaves, shorting out Corindar sensors. The tide turned again. Concord Elite fell. Duct-taped humans remained standing. By the time the fighting ceased in that sector, Grell Station had lost 2/3 of its operational control zones. And the humans? They set up camp in the engine bays, repaired what was broken, repainted their armor, ate rations, filled their tape rolls. One message was spray-painted on the wall above the seized command deck. It doesn't need to look good, it needs to work. The duct tape doctrine had proven its worth. Now, for the first time, the Concorde realized this wasn't incompetence. It was weaponized improvisation. When the Concorde Council received word that their elite Corindar strike unit had fallen to a group of unrefined human marines with scrap tech and tactical tape, the chamber fell into stunned silence. That silence didn't last long. What followed was outrage. Atrax lords demanded a declaration of war. The Zereth coalition called for the complete erasure of the Sol system. And the normally impartial Grolic engineers pushed for an immediate study not of Terran weapons, but of Terran methodology. The Council feared a precedent, if accrued. Chaotic species like humanity could dominate one of their strongest installations. What else might they be capable of? Within hours, 17 Concorde vessels, all top-tier AI-directed warships, were dispatched to intercept and eliminate the UTS Righteous Misfire and reclaim Grell Station. The fleet arrived in perfect formation, engines humming like orchestrated song, weapons primed. A standard Concorde fleet was a work of art, silent, smooth, and fatal. Then the misfire limped into their view. The human dreadnought looked worse than ever. Smoke drifted from one engine nacelle. Starboard stabilizers blinked in and out of sync. Parts of the hull were charred, others completely missing. And yet it moved. The Concorde Admiral Vexenthal transmitted a surrender ultimatum. Captain Voss responded not with negotiation, but with one sentence, broadcast on all open channels. You laughed at our tech, so now you get to fight it. With a sudden burst of thrusters and a trail of duct tape fluttering from the external antenna, the misfire charged forward. The Concorde fleet opened fire in perfect sequence. Beams of plasma and quantum lances lit up the space between them. The misfire should have been torn apart in seconds. But instead, it danced. It didn't move like a precision-engineered vessel. It jerked, lunged, stuttered a chaotic pattern that disrupted Concorde targeting algorithms. The misfire jettisoned debris clouds as decoys, released gas bursts laced with metal filings to scramble sensor reads. Several Concorde vessels lost. Lock-on within the first 60 seconds. Then the humans struck back. They didn't use clean plasma or calibrated torpedoes. No, these were junk missiles, cobbled together from scavenged parts. Each missile was heavy, slow, and absolutely devastating. One such projectile, a welded shell packed with engine coils and ceramic shards, struck the flank of a Concorde. The destroyer tore through its hull. The automated shielding system didn't even recognize the kinetic payload as a threat until it was too late. The Concorde AI systems faltered. Threat profile mismatch. Several command nodes reported simultaneously. Unrecognized behavior. Recalculating. But humans weren't waiting. Inside the misfire, engineers moved like mad geniuses. When a capacitor blew on deck 4, they didn't retreat. They ripped the unit out, jammed in a replacement from a food processor, wrapped it in duct tape, and yelled, "It'll hold." Moments later, the forward shields came back online at 147% of rated capacity. Human rage had become protocol. Ensign Petra, bleeding from a gash on her cheek, rewired. A torpedo launcher by hand while screaming at a tech specialist who dared to suggest retreat. Voss herself took a plasma burn to the shoulder and sealed the wound with a heating rod and duct tape, then got back on the command deck like it was nothing. Across the ship, morale wasn't just high, it was furious. They weren't fighting for glory, they weren't fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove a point. The Concorde fleet, meanwhile, began to fracture. AI warships, unable to adapt to the sheer chaos of human strategy, became predictable. Human pilots aboard scrap fighters used irregular burn patterns and crash docking, tactics to disable key weapons on Concorde cruisers. Boarding pods many homemade slammed into hulls, ejecting Marines armed with what could generously be called experimental gear. One squad used EMP charges built from modified toaster cores. Another team disabled a Concorde targeting relay using chewing gum, copper wire, and a weaponized blender. No one ever figured out how the blender worked in vacuum, but it did. Concorde ships began going dark. Fleet cohesion collapsed. Admiral Vexen, watching from the flagship Verdiction, gave the final order: destroy the misfire, even if it meant sacrificing Grell Station, but it was already too late. The station had gone dark. The misfire was still alive. And the final broadcast from Terran Command chilled every Concorde officer listening. You thought our tech was a joke? You didn't realize that Rage is our upgrade protocol? Now you get to see version 2. And somewhere in the galaxy, Earth Command received a single, simple report: Grell Station compromised. Concorde fleet broken. Misfire operational. Duct tape holding. Rage increasing. The Terran ship, UTS Righteous. Misfire floated like a wounded animal among the wreckage of the shattered Concorde fleet. Hull breaches dotted its surface, entire panels were gone, and 3 of its main reactors were offline. But despite the catastrophic damage, the misfire still moved, stubbornly, relentlessly. Impossibly, Captain Maya Voss stood on the bridge, her uniform scorched, her shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, and of course duct tape. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. We're not done yet. She knew what was coming. Concorde Command wouldn't tolerate this humiliation. They'd send more. They'd burn the wreckage of the misfire just to prove they still held galactic dominance, and she would give them something to remember as predicted. Long-range scans confirmed that another fleet was en route, bigger, meaner, fully AI, coordinated with fleet-wide sync protocols. They'd wipe the misfire from existence. But not before Voss executed the misfire gambit, a final, unorthodox plan born from desperation, grit, a uniquely human capacity for improvisation. Step 1. Deconstruct the misfire. To the horror of her bridge crew, Voss gave the order to start stripping the ship. All non-essential systems, scrap them. Pull every wire, bolt, relay, and coolant pipe. We're turning this warship into a bomb. Engineers hesitated, but only for a moment. They knew Voss. Knew her plans always sounded insane, till they worked. They began with the reactor's casing repurposed to directional shielding. Next came the missile racks. They weren't launching anymore. But the explosive payloads were now wired into an improvised cascade detonation system. Even furniture didn't escape the salvage order. The crew broke down tables, paneling, and even bulkheads to create shrapnel-laced inner walls. One deck chief welded together a pressure cooker, thermal core, and 7 cans of dehydrated protein packs into a compact reactor destabilizer, tight with multiple layers of duct. Tape shouldn't work, he said grimly, but it will. Step 2. Evacuate but leave chaos behind. Voss wasn't suicidal. She wasn't going to martyr her crew. Escape pods were too slow and exposed, so the crew used junk fighters scavenged enemy wreckage, fused with parts of the misfire. The ships looked like space debris, barely capable of thrust, but they launched anyway. Burning hard for the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, each fighter carried only basic thrusters, minimal shielding, and human pilots who refused to die politely. Before leaving, they seeded the station now under Terran control with booby traps, false signals, misleading data logs, and malfunctioning AI decoys. One hacked AI beacon transmitted endless loops of a single human message: "You still think we're the joke?" Meanwhile, the misfire's remains spun into a slow drift toward the incoming Concorde fleet, silent and seemingly powerless. Concorde sensors detected its wounded state and assumed it was finished. They approached with confidence. Step: activate the misdirection in the payload as the Concorde reinforcements moved into range. The misfire's internal timer ticked down. It wasn't a clean self-destruct. It was a chaotic symphony of unstable reactions. The pressure cooker bomb in the core began to melt down. Cables fed feedback into the power grid. Coolant lines redirected thermal energy to a single focal point. Duct tape, holding parts barely in place, now became the last thread keeping the system from going critical. The moment Concorde flagships came close enough to scan the fire's warped reactor signature, it happened. The ship erupted, but it wasn't a single explosion. IOD was a rolling, layered detonation that sent out a concentrated EMP shockwave. The Concorde fleet's AI systems, built on harmonized quantum links, were all hit simultaneously. 17 ships lost control. Weapon systems glitched, shields flickered out, engines surged or died entirely. Then came the real attack. Step 4. Weaponize the wreckage. From the asteroid field, the Terran fighters returned not alone, but towing cargo pods loaded with jagged, weaponized hull fragments, spikes, panels, broken plating sharpened into blades. They used magnetic launchers, literal spring-loaded devices, to fire these chunks into the drifting, vulnerable Concorde ships. They didn't need targeting computers. They only needed rage. Terran boarding parties re-engaged, this time with even more absurd gear. One squad welded jetpacks out of coolant tanks. Another used a railgun powered by old reactor batteries. And everywhere they went, they carried rolls of duct tape sealing leaks, wiring bombs, strapping weapons to walls. On board one Concorde ship, a human message was found carved into the bulkhead. If it's stupid and it works, it's Terran. Step 5. Send the message. Once the Concorde fleet was crippled or captured, Voss transmitted her final broadcast to Concorde High Command. Her bloodied face appeared on every major channel. She stood in front of a torn Terran banner, flanked by fighters patched with scavenged alien tech. Her voice was calm, measured, furious. We offered peace, you offered mockery. You looked down on our tech, our tactics, our people. Up at the wreckage of your fleets, and realized we never needed polish. We needed purpose. She paused, then held up a roll of silver duct tape. This held our ship together. Where arrogance tore yours apart. The misfire may be gone, but humanity is just getting started. The smoldering debris of the shattered Concorde fleet hung like a metallic graveyard above Grell Station. Ships that had once inspired awe now drifted in silence, engines disabled. AI cores fried, and hulls punctured by improvised Terran war tactics. The UTS Righteous Misfire no longer existed as a ship, but its memory, its message was alive and roaring, back on Earth. The broadcast from Captain Maya Voss played on every screen. This held our ship together. Your arrogance tore yours apart. And she held up that roll of duct tape like a symbol, not of weakness, but of unbreakable human resolve. The galaxy had never seen a war fought this way, not with sleek lines and sterile precision, but with grit, rage, and gear that looked like it belonged in a garage, not orbit. The Galactic Concorde Council, once so proud, so smug in its supremacy, now sat in stunned, embarrassed silence. Every council race had sent their best ships, their finest warriors. They'd laughed at Terran technology, mocked it as a pathetic excuse for starfaring civilization. But in a matter of days, Earth had taken that laughter, weaponized it, and thrown it back at them, wrapped in explosive scrap metal, coded viruses, and somehow modified cooking appliances. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a cosmic humiliation. Concorde data centers tried to analyze the loss, but nothing fit their models. AI systems had been overwhelmed not by superior code, but by inconsistency, by chaos. How do you calculate a combatant who doesn't follow logic, who changes tactics mid-fight not because it's efficient, but because it's fun? One Concorde admiral famously remarked afterward, "It's like trying to fight a thunderstorm with blueprints." The council tried to spin it. They released statements blaming unexpected variables and systemic failures in drone coordination. But the rest of the galaxy wasn't buying it, especially not the frontier species. The independents, the upstarts who had always looked at the Concorde with resentment. Now, they looked to Earth with something else entirely. Hope, admiration, and a little bit of fear. Because the humans didn't just win, they won ugly. They made it clear that survival didn't belong to the most advanced. belonged to the most. Determined, back on Grell Station. Now under Terran control, Earth engineers began stripping Concord tech for analysis. But not to replicate it, they had no interest in mimicking their enemies. They wanted to see where it broke, to understand the flaws that arrogance had built into its bones. One technician cracked open a Concord AI relay and laughed. They spent 100 years designing this thing, and one EMP toaster took it down. The station's new designation was burned into its outer ring in crude lettering. TSS Improvised Justice. A hybrid fortress now powered by Terran cores and Concord fuel lines connected. Predictably, with massive amounts of duct tape. From its command center, Captain Voss, still recovering from her wounds, watched as Allied vessels from minor civilizations began arriving. Messages poured in from planets across the fringe. They offered alliance, trade, and in some cases, even tribute. Not out of fear, but because they finally believed that someone could stand up to the Concord, she forwarded the incoming requests to Earth. Command with a single note, "The galaxy is listening now. Let's make sure it hears us." Meanwhile, the Galactic Concord faced its greatest internal crisis since its founding. Debates broke out across their networks. Should they retaliate, or should they negotiate? One senator suggested another strike. The room went quiet. Another suggested sanctions. The others laughed nervously because deep down, they all knew the truth. They had seen the edge of human wrath. They had seen their most advanced fleets disabled by what they once called junk. They had watched as warriors in patched armor outmaneuvered elite cyber troopers, using tools from a maintenance shed. Worst of all, they knew that was just one ship, one misfire, one captain, one crew, and they still had lost. Back on Earth Industries. Boomed. Terran military recruiters couldn't keep up with the flood of volunteers. The Misfire's crew returned as heroes. Statues were raised. Stories were told, but the most lasting image was a simple one, a roll of duct tape, now displayed in the Terran Hall of Honor, sealed in a stasis field. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Mock the tech, face the rage. This held us together," and it tore them apart. Across the stars. Everyone remembered, humanity doesn't need sleek machines.